Gruesome, Gorgeous by Unicorn Popcorn 14. Summary. Drowning is as old of a concept as it gets. In fact, the ridiculous amount of times he's attempted with this particular method had, for better or for worse, prolonged his breath-holding duration significantly. The instances Chuuya would fish him out had been few, though struck the most, as each time Dazai would ask why he didn't just let him die in peace, his answer would be the same. As long as I'm around, you're not getting what you want that fucking easily. Just accept the fact that I'll save your sorry ass every time. Even though you'd never do the same for me. Oh, how Dazai currently wishes that were true. Or the time Dazai jumped out of a helicopter for Chuuya. Dazai could tell this was a bad idea from the very beginning, all for the reason that this was Chuuya's idea. You sit your useless ass here, I'll get to you when I'm done. The helicopter's wings are loud, though sadly never louder than his irritating partner's words. Feisty blues engulf his vision as the other's hair and attire, caught by the tempest of the rotor blades right above them, palpitate violently. The moon is tinted in red tonight, matching the shade of the boy's hair before him, and it's the fitting hue in respect for the mess currently occurring beneath. Dazai stares blankly as a reaction to the blatant promise that cannot be kept. It's only been a few months since the Verlaine incident, and never once had Arahabeki showed hints of recognizing Dazai once he's fully released, much less seeking to get nullified by him. Chuuya is definitely aware of this, yet he's glaring at him with those stubborn eyes, enticing a challenge for Dazai to protest, so he can simply do what's on his mind either way. Dazai does not humor those particular challenges, as yes, signalizing his partner's incredible narrow-mindedness is always tempting, though in instances like these, Dazai can easily see that even his craftiness will never successfully waver the redhead's brashness. In turn, he does not point out the obvious, the stakes, or the risks. He does not bring logistics to the table as he'd done every other time. He does not bother shed light on the fact that this is basically a roundabout suicide attempt that Dazai would have loved to try had he been in the other's place. Because this is Chuuya's choice, and his choices do not concern Dazai in the slightest. Ordering me around, He opts for a regular jab, a silent assent. Someone forgot who the dog in the partnership is. His head tilts coolly with a smile, hand keeping his coat from fluttering away. Chuuya simply flips him off, turning around and nearing the edge. Go to hell. He's gone in a blink. How predictable. Dazai in fact does not sit his ass on the chair, despite the flaring of his cracked fibula and concussed head. Instead he deadpans, smile faltering at the slight limp he lets happen as he nears the edge, right where the hat rack had just been, and braces himself for a peculiar show. Let's see how this one transpires. This is going to be an interesting report. The ocean is all that can be properly discerned where he's at, reflecting the harsh glow of the blood moon. If Dazai were to tilt his head to the right just slightly, he'd find the tsunami about to devour the entirety of Yokohama's port, along with the buildings and houses just unlucky enough to have been built near the bay. The price of it landing is devastating, to say the least. Dazai does not tilt his head, however, hyper-focused on the red, angry figure descending and descending and descending, intent on a destination, intent on a cause. The cause to destroy an enemy. True, because while a tsunami is a natural hazard, a tsunami this big is not. And narrowing his eye, Dazai can see another figure just further below, wearing white and posing dramatically with its hands outstretched. A dumb foe Dazai has not bothered to learn the name or motivation of, the only considerable threat about it being its destructive ability of controlling water. Sokuku, as the ones to divert enormous crises basically monthly at this point, were the easy choice when it came to pick who will handle this particular one. Dazai hadn't even waited for his direct boss to order anything of him, simply headed to the scene dragging his dumb mutt along. His mistake, however, was coming to the scene on shore at first. As on paper, this is a piece of cake to double back. Dazai nullifies the ability, Chuuya punches the shit out of said ability's owner. But that certainly could not be done here, as their foe can float by manipulating the water in her system, and was further in the ocean than Dazai could reach, making the battle a little one-sided in the first round. Chuuya had considered using Tainted. Dazai simply called him stupid without bothering to explain why. Chuuya knew why. Dazai couldn't fly, Dazai could barely swim, and Dazai was definitely not going to let another natural disaster occur by allowing the god of calamity to go rogue. Things, as one might expect, took an ugly turn as they received rather ungraceful blows. The brunette in particular got knocked out for a few minutes. They retreated for a helicopter soon enough, angering their opponent further, who decided it would be swell to just drown half of the city in one go, rather than simply threaten with the idea of doing so. And now, with the same plan Dazai had obliquely rebuked earlier unfolding before him, the frown etching on his face can't be helped. His partner roars as per routine, familiar ugly laughs clear to Dazai's ears even when he is more than 200 meters away. He rips through the wave, each particle of water he touches floating along with him, which gives the illusion of him acquiring an entirely different ability on his own. Their opponent bristles and shouts, angry and cursing, but Arahabaki barely lets her continue before a black hole is formed with a mere snap of a finger, swallowing everything in its path. The sight would have taken the demon prodigy's breath away, hadn't he been more focused on the then what of this whole ordeal. This isn't the first time Chuuya jumped out of an aircraft and used corruption, but it is the first time Dazai isn't able to stand on ground in order to catch him, simply because there is no ground to stand on, to Dazai's mild frustration. I'll get to you when I'm done. Fine, Dazai will wait. Dazai will wait for no other reason but to prove the brainless hat-rack wrong. But waiting would mean the other wouldn't be present so he can rub it in his face now, would he? His lips thin as he intently watches the battle reach its end. Their foe has been taken down, or more accurately, severed and left to drown in her own territory. But her defeat hasn't nullified the tsunami's rage, which means that Arahabaki has another matter to deal with here. Even without looking at all, Dazai can tell that Chuuya's body is scarcely holding on. His tolerance to corruption has been improving, though it isn't great. It barely lasted 5 minutes the last time they had resorted to this vile trump card Dazai deplores, and it's already been 3. Arahabaki doesn't seem to mind, hoarse cackling echoing in the skies as he produces more hellish black holes, colors rivaling the moon's, again and again and again, throwing each and everyone at the hydrous mountain of destruction that is beginning to crumble at the hands of a tiny god that Dazai does not believe in. Said brunette's mind runs a mile a minute, eyes darting in sheer concentration. Dazai can wait. Dazai will wait. However, he grimaces at the choice he has to consider, already envisioning what's about to occur without effort, master seer he is and all, though that doesn't mean he has to humor said predictions. In fact, things will take a much different route depending on what Dazai decides to do in approximately 40 seconds. He weighs his options. This is Chuuya's choice. Him paying the price would be his choice as well. For all Dazai sees, this is the perfect opportunity to finally get rid of the tiny brute Mori's forced him to work alongside. Yet he also doesn't find the idea of Mori chastising him for leaving their strongest ally to perish the least bit pleasing, nor would he appreciate getting haunted by a chibi slug for the rest of his life for letting him die in such a dumb way, which is entrusting his life in Dazai's hand. How stupid can one be? Dazai lets out a deep, calculated sigh, and takes off his coat without tearing his eye off of the embodiment of chaos that is now just hollering in false hilarity. His leg stings persistently as he is right on the edge, but he pays it no mind as he orders the pilot, "Return to headquarters, your job here is done." The man sputters, head tilted back to address him. Return? But Nakahara-san has made it clear that, let me rephrase that, you are of no use to us anymore. Do you wish to test what that statement could entail? He cocks his head blankly, watches as the pilot's face pales, then his head shakes. Good. You're not worth my time anyway. He throws his coat beside the abandoned fedora a little too carelessly, and refocuses back on what might be the riskiest move he's pulling in a long time, which is saying something considering, well, Givre. Because from the moment he throws himself out there and onward, Dazai has no idea what could possibly ensue. And that is new, to put it lightly. But Dazai won't wait. Dazai can't wait, since otherwise that would mean obeying his dog's order to sit his ass down, and that to him is the most demeaning thing of all. God, looking after that slug is such a hassle. 13 seconds. The helicopter starts to tilt right where Dazai has ordered it to head, which allows him to near his target as accurately as he can guess without clear depth perception. Dazai considers taking the bloodied bandage over his eye off, but finds that would be too time-consuming. 8 seconds. The wave has less than quartered in size, big, yet not big enough to cause the city intense damage, which he considers good enough. Arahabaki still soars, still persistent to evoke as much of a mess as he can while being released. 6. Now! Dazai unthinkably leaps, faintly discerns the pilot's startled shout before all he can hear is the rippling sounds of rushing wind, a loud, painful static of nothing that is both welcoming and dreading. Dazai's eye squints at the onslaught of said wind, becoming almost immediately winded as if he'd been punched in the lung. The tidal wave on his right looms over both of them like a collapsing barricade, the oceanic scent strong and alluring. Statistically, it takes almost 5 seconds in order to land from a 200-meter dive, yet Dazai already feels like it's been hours, barely trying to balance himself and keep his hands to his sides so it might help him drop faster. He has to give credit where credit's due. Chuuya makes it look so easy. Speaking of which, while Dazai can barely register anything due to his overstimulated senses, he can almost immediately spot the anguished eye roll of his partner, and hear the cackle that is more of a cry for help than anything. Dazai's eye widens impossibly. Shit. He's nearer but he's not yet there, and Chuuya's body is clearly unable to withstand further deterioration. Chuuya is going to pass out before Dazai touches him. Shit! Don't you dare! He strains inaudibly to the wind, one of his bandaged arms difficultly outstretching in an effort to get a hold of what is still beyond his reach, what is now frantically pulling at its own hair. The wave draws closer, threatening only by its presence, rumbling in lieu of a countdown. Dazai requires 1 second more. Just one. Chuuya tilts his head upwards as if he'd sensed him, as if he'd heard him, and Dazai's eye widens even further in alarm. Chuuya never acknowledged him during corruption. Ever. And Dazai's mutter being heard amidst the thunderous chaos is near impossible. Then what? The vacant eye meets his single one, and Dazai sees each and every ancient mark tattooed on pale skin, each streak of crimson dripping and getting lost in the vast sea. But that's not what steals his already shallow breath out of him. Chuuya smiles. No, grins. Grins so widely his cheeks must hurt. Grins so awfully that his teeth are bared and his canines are showing. Grins directly at Dazai like he's the most hysterical thing he'd ever laid his non-existent pupils on. Every single nerve in Dazai feels like it's been doused in ice. Arahabaki is taunting him. No! Dazai's an inch away. No! Like it was a hallucination, the expression drops, and Chuuya drops with it. Chuuya! Dazai's throat aches, fist grips on air, and eye burns watching the gap between them widen after he was close. He was so fucking close. The hiss of a groundswell, too proximate, up against him, causes Dazai to whip his head in horror, faintly discerning the bulleting torrents hitting him and wrenching parts of the fabric clothing him. He looks below once more, where he's still on a chase he can admit he's already lost. Mentally and devastatingly, notes that his partner's body is still swathed in that deep, dark, disgusting red. Then swallows, closes his eye, and inhales the air he can in mere milliseconds. The sudden douse is agonizing, much more than a stab, much more than a bullet. It's unforgiving and cold, numbing and paralyzing all at once. Dazai almost loses what little oxygen he already has, concussed head newly searing and body shivering in foreign panic as he wants nothing but to scream. Yet he holds it all in through sheer will and determination alone, and opts to open his single eye quickly because the fall must have broken his partner's speed and in turn is now nearby. He has to be. And yet, just as he hits the water, the tidal wave finally crashes, the force of it blinding. Dazai barely reacts before he's getting hurled like a rag doll, his proximity to the surface not doing him any favors. The distance feels never-ending, the compressions of his lungs drive his pupils to roll, the lack of control of his whole body sends him dizzy with dismay and choking on dread. But somehow the most prominent thing screeching in his mind is, Chuuya's dying, Chuuya's dying, Chuuya's dying! His body comes to a sudden halt with a sickening strike, back searing with bubbles escaping past his grinded teeth as he tries to get a hold of whatever he had hit in a senseless effort to break the surface that he can hardly find. The slab of a broken boat meets his flailing fingers and he pulls himself up. The hacks that attack him are not appeasing in the slightest, given their unnecessary protracting, and Dazai grimaces and shakes against the force of them as he tries to ignore how much every inch of his body feels like it burns, just to survey his surroundings between each cough. The wave has just died, stopping barely before reaching the nearest building to the bay, but what Dazai focuses on is how he's neared the shore, 400 meters away if his hasty estimate is of any accuracy. Swimming back would be a hassle, and his stamina will likely fail him midway, but these are all concerns for later. No time to waste. The moment he's able to inhale a fully fledged breath, Dazai barely takes a second to gulp, then plunges. He'd memorized where the disheveled boat is, predicted precisely where each piece of it is going to steer, and now all that's left is retrieving the useless slug that's got him in this mess in the first place. Easier said than done. His pupil burns with salt, cheek puffed in an effort to entrap what little oxygen he's holding in, garments incredibly heavy and constricting whenever he maneuvers. He still kicks downwards, fractured fibula protesting at the strain, yet he simply squints, relying on the blood moon to spot anything. Anything. Dazai doesn't know how deep Chuuya was when the wave landed, and Dazai doesn't know how far it might have carried him. The thought of not knowing in of itself is such a disturbing concept it sends nausea coursing through him. But he's adamant not to get himself back up before finding his partner, as falsely endearing as that sounds. Had it been literally any other instance, Dazai would have succumbed to the aching of his lungs, would have let the ocean engulf him inside and out with its familiar rush of relief in none other than muscle memory at this point. But the thought of Chuuya currently experiencing what he'd oh so craved since time immemorial is what drives him forward, what lets him fight tooth and nail in unmitigated spite, because how dare he? Drowning is as old of a concept as it gets. In fact, the ridiculous amount of times he's attempted with this particular method had, for better or for worse, prolonged his breath-holding duration significantly. The instances Chuuya would fish him out had been few, though struck the most, as each time Dazai would ask why he didn't just let him die in peace, his answer would be the same. As long as I'm around, you're not getting what you want that fucking easily. Just accept the fact that I'll save your sorry ass every time. Even though you'd never do the same for me. Oh, how Dazai currently wishes that were true. Just as each and every organ of his feels like it's about to burst, his blurred eye dilates once he unmistakably finds it. A glowing red figure midst mesmerizing blue, ethereally floating in place a bunch of meters deep in the ocean. It's scarily still, inert as if it is right where it belongs, as if it's home. The peculiar thing about it is the clear line surrounding it, and Dazai, in his minute but earlier scare at the thought of Chuuya drowning for how long it required to retrieve him, aches in unprecedented relief to find him trapped in an air pocket of his own making. It seems that Arahawaki had enough courtesy to preserve his little vessel for a bit longer. Dazai rushes towards the scene that almost feels like a fever dream, and just before his need to breathe could suffocate him, he plops his head in the air pocket with a greedy gulp of oxygen, nearly collapsing right then and there. His panting is so rapid it scorches his chest, blinking in an effort to cleanse the salt from his eye to clear his distorted sight. Amidst the relief of it, Dazai almost reconsiders snapping corruption at all, as the thought of getting doused in water again is all but a skin-crawling nightmare, before his pupil lands on the specks of crimson gliding gently, as if they're parts of the sea that have no place in an air pocket, thus need to be discarded, causing the clear line of the bubble to get painted in a tinge of red. It's such an enigmatic sight that Dazai's desperate panting subsides and his eye sparkles as he stares at the ancient marks that are still present, pulsing as if alive, eating away at his partner's flesh bit by tiny bit like hungry vultures. He is certain that had his dog possessed an ounce of consciousness at the moment, he'd do nothing but howl in sheer agony. It's beautiful, in its unique, alluring way, with how the blood beats that Chuuya's wounds disperse float in a betray of laws and physics, with how his lips are parted in a grueling intent to heave his chest. The only missing part is the pair of feisty agers that match the shade of the surrounding ocean, looking back at him. Chuuya's beautiful, and Chuuya's dying. You're both goddamn nuisances. Dazai croaks in frustration that's overdue, drenched hair dripping on the body beneath him, set droplets hovering unnaturally the moment they land. I sincerely hate you. It sounds like something Chuuya would scold him with after saving him from an attempt, and Dazai reels in even more disgust at comparing himself to a hat rack. He tries to regain his tone, shaking hand aiming for the forehead, other hovering over the wrist. Take a breath, Chibi, lest this all would have been in vain. The moment his fingers get stained with crimson, the air pocket pops, sending Chuuya's head jerking back and hair swirling yieldingly in its submersion. The bubbles escape past his lips instantly, and Dazai inwardly curses each and every event that led them to this point. With a rough grasp on a limp wrist, Dazai begins their strenuous tread that appears infinite miles away. It's an uncanny feeling to aim for the surface instead of the seabed. Dazai's whole association with water is to drown in it, and thus never bothered to learn how to properly swim, as it is a means to save his life, and he's got enough people in his life already adamant to do so, as regrettable as it is. Tonight, Dazai might just regret never taking Utasako's offer to teach him how to swim. The oxygen deprivation makes itself known with how lightheaded he's getting all too soon, as the edges of his sight seem to turn into black flecks, then pulses of reddish white. His chest feels like it's being compressed right in the center by a giant fist and pulled apart at the same time, while his whole body feels tingly and rigid, neck tense like there's fingers pushing inward against his esophagus and throttling him. His ears are throbbing, hearing his own heartbeat, what might be his last few pulses. Iris tinged with red, it can't help its own lacrimation with each arduous blink. His tears never fall, for all they manage is float, mocking before him as they reach the surface like it's the simplest thing to accomplish. His teeth grit desperately, squinting in search of light that would at least reassure him that he's heading the right way, fingers starting to twitch and lose their strength. His fear and panic of accidentally letting the redhead go only bursts newfound adrenaline within. He kicks and keeps kicking, till he can no longer feel his legs, fractured or otherwise. His free arm aids in propelling them, the weight he's pulling hindering his speed, but not like he's got much of it to begin with. Giving up sounds like the most gorgeous of dreams, though he overrides that urge with silent, desperate prayer. Please don't let this be his double suicide, please. Finally, after what's felt like a millennia of agony, a hopeless blind journey, Dazai's hand slaps the part of a broken boat he'd earlier tracked and grips on it like a lifeline, which it is. He doesn't even allow himself time to properly intake any air, hauling the shorter by the torso difficultly on top of the broken boat, which can only sustain one small figure beforehand. Chuuya lurches, lips a shade of blue as his lungs reject what had invaded them with gagging and gurgling and hacking and all sorts of disgusting sounds that Dazai finds to be melody to his ears, because he truly wouldn't have known what to do had the chibi been in need of CPR, had been scarily silent. Dazai himself, in his sloppy attempts to breathe, inhales water by accident, which sends him choking with coughing fits, and remains in a vicious cycle of inhaling and retching till he finally takes a mouthful of oxygen that starts to clear his vision bit by tiny bit. The moon's red hue reflects the water like a bloodbath, and the brunette can't keep his concussed head lifted for a few seconds before thumping it back on the board with a sigh. He did it. He did it. And it's still not over yet. If he were human, Dazai was almost certain he'd be sobbing under all this strain and pressure, though years of living in that shell of a body has proved that he's far from that, and so he does nothing but shallowly breathe and listen to his partner do the same. The smell of salt water has become nauseating. Its rhythm of motion should be horror-inducing. Yet strangely, all that accomplishes is lulling him to close his eyes and almost sleep, consciousness hanging on by a thread. After a moment of needed rest, however long that was, he manages to haul his head to squint at the distance left. The brunette knows he has no strength to push the broken wood, especially with the slug's annoyingly heavy self accompanying him. The alternative is trying to swim while carrying said slug, and that option gets discarded at once. Without need to stall further, Dazai simply gets on with directing the wood towards shore. Time stretches immensely. His swimming kicks are pitifully weak, form wrong, thus slow, and his wet fingers half debilitated, causing them to inadvertently lose his grasp on the wood a bunch of times. Attempting to regain it is especially a nuisance when you're trying to avoid tipping half a boat over. It feels like he'll only reach the shore after a year, perhaps several. Chuuya, according to the glances Dazai occasionally steals, has yet to awaken, and would stay so unless the brunette decides otherwise. His face twists at the peaceful expression of the shorter curled up on his side like he's in bed, envious of such peace, before deciding to stop looking entirely. Pain is but a static at this point, numbed by permeating cold and shivers, and he feels like a zombie with how his head is hanged, pupil void of light as his vision flickers in and out of focus. Heart pulsates in his temple and ears. What might jerk him awake is an accidental in-breathe or swallow of water, which his body is never more fit to properly disperse. He's exhausted. He's exhausted. He wants nothing more but to sleep and never wake up. Yet he still advances. He still pushes. Pauses to take a breather. Nearly passes out. Then carries on with the torturous effort to oppose nature. Sometimes said nature would take mercy and send a small wave or two in aid, which grazes his pride. The scene, pitiful as it is perhaps the most he'd endeavored in his 16 years of pure misery. Dazai fights against the odds, his needs, his instincts. Fights for survival like he'd never fought before. Fights until he flinches at the sensation of wet sand under his shoe. The seabed close enough, the shore closer. Dazai thrusts forward with his one good foot, something finally giving him enough leverage to narrow the distance. Inversely, he opts to ignore the flaring of his broken bone once the water is too shallow for the boat to float in, gets up with Chuuya dragged by the back of his collar, and treks with ground teeth, an unsteady gait, and a quivering form till the salt water is unable to tickle his ankles anymore. A crack reverberating in his calf brings him to his knees with a yelp, though he can't find it in him to rest well with the waves still washing the tips of their toes, on the off chance they might get drifted again. He crawls the few centimeters left with his partner underneath him, and a bit further, and a bit more, farther than the water could ever hope to reach. The sand sticks to them eagerly, latches onto each and every drenched particle it comes in contact with. Chuuya's hair and back get the finest coating. Dazai's knees, hands, and end parts of his pants a close second. The sensations burn, amongst many, but solid ground feels so heavenly that that's honestly the least of his worries. He isn't sure how he finds himself coughing on top of his partner with an urge to howl or rage cry, knees on either sides of the older's hips, hands buried in the rough sand on both sides of his neck. Not only does he cough, but painful gagging that turns into whimpers clench at the edges of his throat. Miserable sounds he never thought he's capable of, forced out of him vigorously. Fuck. The residual adrenaline leaves him apt to give in to frustration. He has half a mind to choke the life out of that tiny piece of shit for putting him through such torture, for rendering the demon prodigy in a never-to-be-seen humiliating state. Yet his limbs are terribly shaking to provide much leverage, and it wouldn't be as satisfying with said piece of shit still sound asleep, looking all dandy with no care in the world. Which is why his face only contorts in a scowling, piercing gaze. The blood around the crevices of corruption had been washed, leaving the fresh, slow trickles in their place. Dazai somehow finds enough strength to support himself with a single arm and spank the right cheek with moderate strength. He didn't mean for it to merely be moderate, which earns him twitching lashes trying to haul themselves. Chuuya slowly awakens, and the adrenaline coursing through Dazai manages to seep out of him the more the redhead seems to grasp onto consciousness. His blue eyes are blank at first, darting around in sheer confusion, blinking to clear his vision, groaning as he registers the pain. What the hell? He pants, eyes very much still lost, yet beginning to glisten in lucidity. Where? Once the azure pupils finally meet his single one, the brunette loses all strength he has. His elbows buckle along with his knees, throwing himself on top with an oof. Ah, fuck! One of his hands slither underneath the fiery locks, while the other grips fistfuls of sand in an effort to lessen his body's shaking. Their chests pant and sink, each rise of Chuuya's a fall for Dazai's, and he can't help but find solace in it, in spite of, or perhaps because of, the redhead's pain shriek and stuttering breath. Serves that stubborn mutt right. You... What are you? Chuuya rasps, rough edge to his tone smothered, leaving it small and puzzled in his fit of wheezing. Dazai's grip on his hair tightens. You're utterly imbecilic. He bites his salted lip, stifling the lump in his aching throat down, every inch of him leaden in utter fatigue. I can't stand you. What should have been a snarl comes out as a whimper. Dazai breathes in the crook of the shorter's neck, muscles contracting post their overexertion. This means nothing. The swelling of his chest means nothing. He simply needed to latch onto something, and Chuuya just happens to be the closest thing at the moment. He could have sensed his partner's confusion a mile away, yet Chuuya stays silent, giving him a moment. The slug is irritating like that, intelligent in areas Dazai never bothered to be in, that including emotional recognition. Dazai trembles once as he coughs, senses haywiring when he feels fingers meekly brushing the ends of his hair, wet and stained with salt and blood. He doesn't hate the feeling per se, but it's too much all too soon. The hand lets go in acknowledgement, as an index stabs the back of his head twice in a request for permission, which Dazai shakily nods to, for the feeling of the drenched bandages sticking to his skin will soon send him reeling with overload, a sight his partner's seen twice before, so better shed the one attached to his face off as a start. Chuuya huffs and doesn't bother with finding the pin, pulling at the gauze as roughly as he physically can while they tear under trembling, unsteady fingers. Dazai shakes the dressing off, feels the wind biting his skin in areas he is not used to, and opens his other eye just to check it hasn't gone blind. Not like he can see much besides sand and red hair where he's draped. With a sigh, he allows himself to nuzzle just a bit further when the hand cups his nape once again, and this time, it's soothing. It's then that Chuuya decides to test the mobility of his limbs, the tip of his shoe barely brushing against a particular fractured leg, and Dazai rigids in hot pain before he can help it. Whoa, forgot about that. Chuuya mumbles in lieu of an apology. Deciding that's enough contact for one day, the brunette pushes himself off. He rolls on the sand with a wince, settling on his right shoulder with a thump. The beach's particles cling onto his hair, half of his face, which deepens his wince at the skin-crawling sensations, yet he does nothing to alleviate them. Neither of them possess enough energy for this sort of complication. Chuuya's bloody hand lands limply near his own head, twitching. Dazai's hand curls just beside it. The two of them do nothing but stare at one another and breathe for a while. Until, of course, it's Chuuya who disturbs the quietude. Oi, let me see. He glances down in referral. Not because the hat-rack asked, but because he finds himself equally curious, Dazai slowly pulls at the left cuff of his pants with a deep groan to reveal the limb smeared in crimson, displaced bone not yet protruding but producing a distinct bulge under the skin all the same. The severity of the sight doesn't faze him much, as opposed to Chuuya, who he finds suspiciously gulping in a sickly manner. Fuck, it looks worse than before. He coughs, voice gurgles as he winces. What kind of shit exercise did you perform, Brainiac? Little cardio, some aerobics. He mumbles unhelpfully, finds the smile on his face harder to come by than most. His eyes are half-lidded and clouded with lethargy. Broke a sweater too, basically, unlike a lazy brute. Chuuya sends him an unamused glare. I've got a hunch about what happened, but it's something you'd never do in a million years. His smile dispirits, expression taut. I am not inclined to suffer through listening to your ludicrous theories, Chuuya. That's apparently enough confirmation, because Chuuya's eyes flare in horror. Shit, he whispers, pupils darting as if he's playing the scene in his small brain. Shit, I can't believe you jumped. Who do you think you are, an actual fucking mackerel? I told you I'll get back to you. He weakly, incredulously chastises. You suck at predictions, Hat-Rack. I thought we already established that it is my fort. Except it wasn't a prediction, was it? Because Chuuya was fully aware that it was an empty promise, knew what leaping in the battlefield without Dazai's assistance meant, and still decided to act on that even when he was certain Dazai would never leap after him, for the sole purpose of, everyone's okay though, right? I say this is a win for us. Ah, that. Dazai seldomly gets stupefied, yet somehow, each and every time he does, it involves the boy lying by his side. For no other being in the universe would throw its life away so readily for others, would display such acts of humanity Dazai oh so despises, and pretends it's as easy as breathing, a dime a dozen. Because Chuuya, with his undying loyalty to the city, consciously sacrificed everything in his power to save it. They don't deserve you, Dazai thinks and almost says. You're such a stupid dog. Chuuya bites back his insults, appearing a tinge troubled. He opts to gaze at the stars above. Says the stupid suicidal freak who could have never planned any of this out. Dazai coughs in response. Sometimes he wonders who the real suicidal freak between them is. Chuuya, still stargazing, wills his hand to the side just slightly so his pinky brushes onto the younger's curled one. Dazai knows it's an attempt at a peace offering, which the brunette shows he accepts by clasping them together, like uneven pieces of a puzzle, since Dazai's palm is significantly smaller. The redhead deflates a little in what seems to be relief, looking back at him. So, what now? We're just gonna lay here forever? Are you suggesting I should carry you? Chuuya must rely on me for everything, Fuck off, I can't move a single muscle. He perks in sudden remembrance. Say, what happened to Daisuke-san? Where did he go? His brow ridges. Daisuke-san? The pilot of the helicopter we were on? You haven't bothered with learning his name, at least? Ah, him. He was annoying. Sent him back to HQ. Of course you did. The shorter's eyes roll. Well, I bet Mori-san will send a search party. All according to plan. He sticks his tongue out. No, it fucking isn't. You'd have announced so the moment I mentioned the helicopter. Dazai's face blanks, gaze lowering to the sand. It's the second time he gets called out on his lack of planning and foreseeing, his only useful attributes. For some reason, it sends pangs across his chest. Chuuya knows me so well. He teases, but really doesn't. They lapse onto silence, hand in hand, wind occasionally leaving them shivering messes. Chuuya's strength won't regain until he's properly treated, while all Dazai needs is a power nap that will hopefully be enough to get him back on his feet. Figuratively, that is. However, the thought of sleeping is fraught with risks when the two of them are vulnerable as so, when the sound of waves is all too present in his ears. It's especially disconcerting as Dazai is always the one to stay on high alert post-corruption, gun on the ready with each and every sign of a looming threat. He can't even find the strength to brush the sand off his face. Seeming to be following the same train of thought, Chuuya mutters, You look like shit, but you feel like it too. He doesn't bother reciprocating eye contact, knowing that pisses the other off. All thanks to you. Make sure to mention that in the debriefing. I know, asshole, he grumbles, fingers curling a little. My point is, go to sleep. I'll kick you awake when they find us. Heh, as if he wouldn't follow right after. The ghost of a smile stretches his lips, voice withering. Mind you, if Koyo-san finds us like this, she won't let us live it down. True, which is why I'll stay awake, Chuuya insists impatiently. I'm hardly convinced you will. Don't need your conviction, he says, and the brunette owlishly blinks, smile faltering. Hey, Dazai forces himself to look Chuuya in the eye, to find him with an incredibly sincere expression on his face. Just pass the fuck out already. Dazai knows this is Chuuya's attempt at both apologizing and thanking him, which by no means will appease him after the stunt he pulled. He thinks of all the ways he can make the most out of Chuuya clearly feeling guilty, and by extension, his eyelids fall before he can help it, now that he isn't hyper-aware of the risks or danger. Cooking up schemes that will torment his partner always had that effect. Maybe he'll force him back to corruption training, one of Chuuya's worst nightmares, though it's necessary, as Arahabaki's rebelliousness will surely pose future problems that Tainted already withholds a load of. The fact that the god acknowledged his nullifier at all is a strange feat in of itself, though it can possibly come with its perks if properly handled. Who knows, perhaps there would be a time where Chuuya can converse with him while corrupted. How terrifying would that be? Dazai suddenly coughs, shoulders rattling. I won't catch you drifting down a river anytime soon, huh? Chuuya's tone softens. Oh, he doesn't think he'll come in contact with water for a year at least. No. Good, Chuuya whispers to himself, yet Dazai hears it all the same, tightening his hold by a fraction as the world around him fades. That's good. Ah, shucks, now I am forced to reveal my alter ego. Hey everyone, B here, also known as Unicorn Popcorn 14. Shocking, I know. This fic has been written by yours truly, whose only thought going throughout it was, how many dead apple parallels can I include before they become too many? The answer, apparently, was not enough. But for real now, I had a general rule when I started this channel that I won't be podficking any of my own fics, for no other reason that I didn't feel like it, you know? Especially since Ad Angus Eater has already podficked a bunch of them, and phenomenally at that. But a fan has reached out to me a while ago on Tumblr, and I mean a really long while, asking if I can podfic Gruesome Gorgeous, most likely not knowing that it's mine. The way I was happily freaking out over that, cause like someone likes both my podfics and fics enough to request my own fic to me, it was wild. Thank you so much Ed Cheap King Chuuya, and so sorry for my late delivery. I'll admit, it's a bit awkward reading my own fic aloud, especially with how convoluted the wording is. Made me curse my past self a bunch of times. Hope you enjoyed everyone. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.